So, as I mentioned in my first question, I was having a difficult time with my citations and my sources. When I was approaching citing in my last English class, I was again like really lost, and I was just trying to find any paper that would fit my paper, which not the best idea. I also didn't really give any background information in the author, mostly because I wasn't even looking at the author's background and if they were even credible. I was just like, this one fits into my paper, so I would just do it. Um, and ultimately, like I said, I was just like trying to find any source that would just fit into my paper, and I just took whatever they said as like the truth, as like the be all and end all. I wasn't really thinking about whether this was credible, whether it was gonna, I was just trying to find anything to fit my paper. Um, so, what I learned in this class through the process of doing project one was to make sure that your sources actually, like not actually fit your paper, but also credible. Which, like again, the cars worksheet worked really well with like this part, which was making sure they were credible, and then these parts that were, what was the audience of this particular source, which was like, is the source that I'm looking at going to align with my audience, which it did. For for this one, my audience was educators. Same thing with my other sources. They were talking to educators. The quotes was very helpful. I didn't really use all the quotes that I did in the beginning. I did kind of change them up, but it did help me kind of get an idea of how I was going to integrate the sources that I had and making sure that they actually fit and also credible. And then the authors, looking up the authors and you know making sure learning about the authors and what their background is. Are they a professor? Are they a professional? Like whatever it is that for me, it was the most credible background that they had was like, that they were a professor in education, in you know uh, in education, pretty much. Which I think I'm pretty sure, for one of my feedbacks for my rough draft too, my rough draft. Ms. Bonnie did mention that um I needed to take some time to introduce each author and sum up the source they wrote before heading in for those quotes and discussions, which was I did change. I did end up introducing the authors, which uh definitely did tell my audience that these are credible authors and credible sources, and to and it pretty much just made my paper more credible, by introducing these sources. So for like Teresa Gouache, I don't know her name, but she is a psychology and education researcher, which is pretty much fits into like what my paper is about, which is what engages your charge students when doing remote peer feedback. I think lastly, I learned again that when I'm presenting my sources, I shouldn't really uh, present them as if they were like the whole truth, like the BN and all, like this is like absolute truth. But say that they were claims. I would use words like argument or claim, by using her argument that the best is, same thing here, argues, and then approach, and then I just kind of made sure that they weren't, be like making sure when I was presenting these sources that I wasn't just saying like, oh, this is the absolute truth and the only truth. I think I did a pretty good job of making sure that I wasn't doing that and that I was just, saying, oh, they claimed this, oh, they argued this, and then, versus this author, claimed this or argued this. I think when doing the rest, when future classes, future papers I have to write, I will definitely keep this in mind. I definitely will again use the CARS worksheet, specifically this part. I think quotes, this part of the quotes, and it's really helpful. I think I did it for my sociology class. Pretty sure I did do it for my sociology class. I didn't exactly use the CARS worksheet, but I did use the kind of like quotes things. It was mostly this. It was the author, the thing, and then like the quotes that I possibly did want to use, and I did use some of them. For my final, I did use some of them. I use these. I use the quotes from like a kind of like a good, kind of the same thing as a CARS worksheet, but kind of different, to just kind of like fit into how I do my research and how I want to integrate it into, any project that I'm doing like this. And again, for like, definitely keep it in mind to introduce my sources, to kind of show how credible they are and just ultimately making my paper more professional and more credible. And, also making sure that I'm not saying like, oh, this is the absolute truth and the only truth, when I'm writing another paper. And that they're just kind of like, oh, claiming this. I don't even think I did it for this one, but for these were like just the statistics and data. But I think I learned a lot of how how to research and how to like integrate that into my paper and making sure that I'm being responsible when writing research papers and using secondary sources.